In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the environment, and first of all, what we mean by that and how it links to your health and wellness. So really, by the word environment, we mean the world in which we live, which is currently changing at a phenomenal pace, and it relates to your home environment, your work environment, etc. So why is it important to you, and why is it relevant to you, especially as you age and as you get older? Well, when it comes to getting older and healthcare, it's easy to assume that if we eat better, move more, and don't get too stressed, then that's the perfect recipe and everything will be good. And this is true for the most part. But when we talk about the environment, we're not talking about how environmentally friendly you are, whether you recycle or whatnot. Instead, this is relating to, as I've mentioned, it's where your home is. What's the environment in your home like? What's your work like? What's your location like? And what does this environment then do to your health? And is it affecting you as you're getting older? Because the environment in which we're all subject to is a very different one to the one that we were designed as humans to live in. We now live in houses in urban areas with a very different environment to that of our ancestors. And the rate of change that the human has gone through cannot be matched by the rate of change in evolution. And so the human body and the human brain are simply not able to catch up with the speed of change that has happened to us. And so this has a lot of health implications that often aren't talked about. Because in order for our brain to understand the world in which we live, we have to try to pick up these tiny signals from the environment to tell us about where we are. Because our brain is in a black box and it relies on information to understand exactly where we are. So if the environment in which you live is not optimal to you, then your body will suffer in a multitude of ways in which we're going to go through. Because in the long term, and as you age, with an environment that's not in harmony with essentially the natural cycles of the body, even the best diet and exercise plan may not be enough to help you create optimal health and wellness for the long term. So the question that we often pose to patients is it even possible to get well or be healthy in the same environment that made you sick? And the answer is truly no. You just can't do it, because you may be able to adapt in that unhealthy environment, but ultimately the landscape has to change in order for something to change. Because in the last 100 years, we've seen an explosion of disease rates in this world. Of course, there are many factors that contribute to this, but all it shows us is everything is advancing at an alarming rate, and technological advancements after the Industrial Revolution have completely changed the world in which we live in. We now have everything on hand, especially now, even within the last decade, the rate of change once again. Everything's at the click of a button. Not only that, but what's more interesting to us is two things, which is light and temperature. We live in warm houses year round. Okay, we never suffer, we never shiver, but who knows with these electrical prices going up. We have bright light shining on us all day long into the late hours of the evening. And we have new signals that our body has to interpret with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and all these type things. So in comparison to even 20 years ago, the effect our environment has on our body is potentially going to be a lot stronger, because things are actually very different to how they were. And I think it's quite naive to think that these harmless issues can't really handle us, or can't really affect us, But I think that's naive, because we're not going to be seeing the effects of this for another 30, 40, 50 years, because it's only just happened in the grand scale of things. Because what the human body is actually really good at is adapting and compensating. And we know this from people that come in with back pain. That problem's probably been there for 2 years, but they're only getting pain now because the body is saying, look, I've tried everything I can do, and now I'm going to ring the alarm bell because, look, I need some help. And the same goes to all aspects of the body. We only notice the toll that it's taking when it's too late, when we get the diagnosis, we get sick or we get injured. So probably as I'm speaking, you've probably never considered the effect of the environment on your body, and hopefully these videos are going to help you make sense of what that is, and what you can do to try and rectify it, because light and temperature are really the two most powerful things that our brain uses to understand our what's known as circadian rhythm. This is also known as the body clock. And the body clock is starting to be recognised in the scientific literature as one of the key factors of long-term health, longevity and optimal wellness, because everything is governed by this 24-hour cycle of the day. Okay, so if we're not in line with the environment, we can often see increase in disease rates, degeneration, increased rates of aging, and it's very easy for us, as I say, to put this down to lack of exercise, bad diet. But if your environment is playing a role in the accumulation of these issues, we obviously want to do something about that, right? So in order to understand the world around us, our body and brain need to know about the world in which we're in. And we all recognise that we have a body clock, which regulates our understanding of whether it's day or night and what season it is. And our built-in body clock measures therefore what's known as our circadian rhythm, the time regulator of the body. And this body clock regulates every single function in the body, every single function. So every function is affected by our body clock. We've normal hormonal and life cycles that require normal highs and lows to really maintain proper function. Because we are creatures of cycles, we have normal hormonal cycles and organ cycles that require highs and lows throughout this 24-hour cycle. And many people know about the body clock but have no idea on why it's so important in keeping us alive and healthy. Immediately we can actually recognise that if you have issues with this circadian rhythm, that the body will suffer. The problem is the environment around you that's actually the biggest factor in changing that, and this is changing at a rapid pace. And so our body clocks are having to adapt quite a lot. And so this is controlled by a really small area in the brain known as the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which relies on light signals, ideally from the rising and setting of the sun, as well as temperature signals to tell us what time it is, what time of the year it is, and what season it is. And the SCN is then connecting to our eyes via the optic nerve. So as I said, it's directly influenced by light. So that any light that hits the eye will directly travel to this area of the brain to let us know what season it is, which in turn can have impacts upon our hormonal cycles throughout the day, which are predetermined to work in a certain way. Certain hormones are meant to be high at certain times of the day, and they're meant to be low at other times of the day. So if we're receiving confusing light signals into the eye, making our brains think that it's a certain time, we can now see how this is actually going to influence our hormonal cycles and therefore our health. When light comes into the eye in the morning, UV light, early morning UV light, this has taken a huge, there's been a huge increase in research into this recently. It sets the signal for the day, it resets the body clock, tells us that the day has begun. It causes our heart rate to increase, our temperature to increase, and this is why we're cognitively best at this time of the day. Light also tells our brain to stop producing certain sleep hormones such as melatonin. Because then as the sun sets in the evening, we are what's known as diurnal creatures, and we're meant to start to rest and digest. So this means that no more light should hit our eyes, and we should be preparing for sleep. But we all know that in today's modern world, the light continues. We have bright lights, bright phones, bright lights. And so our brain constantly thinks that this intensity of light tells us that it's the middle of the day and it's the middle of summer. Because the light that we get from these structures is very different to that of sunlight. Sunlight is a broad spectrum based light which has all the colours within it, red, green, blue, etc. But white light that we get from our phones and our TVs and our screens is actually only one frequency of light. It's blue light, and it's the blue in these types of light is 4 times stronger than you would find in the sun. So it's a very, very, very artificial thing that the brain has never had to experience before. It's a very vivid piece of light, which is really telling your brain, oh my God, it is first thing in the morning. And we're watching it late at night. So it's very confusing to the brain. So it may seem a little bit out there, but controlling your light environment is so important to helping your body clock. Because what's now being recognized, that as well as this SCN in the brain, the master clock of the body, we also know that other organs have their own individual clocks that work off this circadian rhythm, such as the heart, pancreas, liver. And it's been shown that every single one of our trillion cells has their own clock genes that are regulated by the light cycles, telling them when to create energy, when to rest, and essentially driving their metabolism in acceleration or break. So we've established that this body clock is a lot more important than perhaps you'd given thought. Okay, it's governed by the SCN area in the brain, and every single function of the body is controlled or affected by this due to the presence of these clock genes in nearly every single cell of the body, mostly driven by light and temperature. These are the 2 key things. Okay. So some people will argue that if your light environment is not correct, then this can have a bigger impact on you than some people would argue even than food when it comes to healthcare. And that's why, because the effects are very, very broad reaching when it's wrong. Okay. When there is synchrony between what the brain clock and the other clocks are doing in the body, ultimately there's going to be much better health, because hormonal cycles and metabolic cycles are going to be equally on the same wavelength. But when there's a mismatch in these cycles, then you're more likely to experience disease-like states, okay? Because if the clocks of different organs are affected, the cells will work at different rates, and so one's going to be driving one way, another one's going to be driving another way. There's a complete disharmony within the body, okay? Really, really don't want to have that happening. So we can see in this diagram here, this is the normal circadian rhythm, the normal cycles of the body. And it's just a reference point for you to understand when things should be doing more and when things should be doing less. In the following videos, we're going to talk more about light, we're going to talk more about temperature, and so these are going to be the much more practical applications of this information to how you can stop this circadian rhythm affecting you and try to get it back to as good as it can be. So when it comes to light, we want to make it as simple as possible. And the most important thing you can do to maximise in your circadian rhythm is spending as much time in natural sunlight as possible, because as we've said, that this is what drives our body clock in the brain. So the more time that natural sunlight hits the retina, the back of the eye, the better it's going to be, because you're getting the correct information about where you are in the world, your latitude and longitude based on the UV light that you're receiving, the time of day that it is, and the season that it is. Whereas if you're for example, if you're at home, it can be as simple as keeping the patio doors open, keeping the windows open, to actually let some light comes in. Because when you have glass blocks the UV part of the light. So we still get the visible light and we get the infrared heat part, but we miss the UV. And therefore we're not actually getting the complete signal that our brain requires to govern our body clock. And sunlight exposure has been obviously a very interesting topic in recent years, and there's natural scares about cancers and damage to the skin, but we're not talking about burning, okay? We never want to burn in the sun. Thankfully in this country, well not thankfully, we never really have enough sun to burn. But even on a cloudy day, you're still getting a lot of lux, which is actually the measure of light, enough to set this body clock to be in the right way. So even on a cloudy autumn day in the UK, it's actually still really important to let natural sunlight hit the back of the eye, because this is going to help reset that body clock. And there's a huge amount of research on this. More recently, a top Harvard neuroscientist by the name of Andrew Huberman, who has a really interesting podcast called Huberman Labs, has done some 2-3 hour deep dive podcasts into this topic if you want to kind of learn more but I want to really just give you the summary of the latest scientific information, okay? Now, the other important factor is, of course, that when there is enough UVB in certain times of the year, then we can also help make vitamin D from natural sunlight. So the only way that we can produce vitamin D is when we have the presence of UVB, light, and cholesterol. So without cholesterol, you cannot make vitamin D. When UVB light hits the skin, we add cholesterol to it, okay, to make vitamin D3 within the skin. This then has to travel to the liver to be transferred into being a more active molecule. And we know that the UK has a chronic deficiency in this. It's thought to be around 1 in 5 people, possibly more, that have a deficiency. And as we age, people spend more times indoor than out, and so the problem just worsens over time. Okay? We are, of course, at a natural disadvantage because UVB from the sun is only present is not present as much throughout the year. Between kind of roughly March and October, we're going to get that, and so we need to kind of boost our stores of vitamin D for the winter, or supplement through the winter. It's really important to have enough vitamin D because not only is it important for your bone health, as it's needed for calcium to help strengthen the bones, calcium without vitamin D is actually quite dangerous. Okay. Otherwise, it protects us against colds, depressions, and really a lot of important things. There's a huge link between vitamin D deficiency and chronic pain. And so another reason why we want to maintain normal levels. So, as I mentioned, vitamin D can only be made when cholesterol is present. And so making sure that you're having enough healthy fats in the diet is another important factor. So in order to practically give you the best light environment possible, the most important thing is getting the morning sunrise or as early sunlight as you can into the eyes. So this either means first thing when you wake up, go and have your cup of tea outside. It might mean keeping the window open on the drive into work. It might mean taking the dog out first thing in the morning. It doesn't have to be complicated, even if there's cloud coverage. But it's this morning sunlight exposure that helps reset that body clock and let us know, hey, it's first thing in the morning, okay, we're good to go. And if you skip that, if you go from an indoor house with no windows open, no UV light hitting the eye, you immediately get into your car and then you go into the office, you've actually not experienced any sunlight. You might experience 30 seconds of sunlight by midday. And so getting 15 to 20 minutes in the morning can actually be really, really important, because we've seen now and recognise that when people go camping and they spend 72 hours or whatever it might be outside in nature, they can fully reset their body clock, which is quite interesting. And so morning UV light is the most important thing. So we want maximal sunlight in the morning, but we also want to avoid as much light in the evening as possible. So we want to fake the sunset, which means that once it goes dark in the UK, which is obviously earlier in the winter, we want to decrease our exposure to fake light. So that might mean, depends how extreme you want to go with this, of course. It might mean using incandescent type lighting within your home, or even using candlelight when reading. It might mean just getting a pair of blue light blocking glasses, which is my personal preference, because I can carry on in a modern life, but know that I'm not getting blue light hitting the back of my eye. You can get ones within the clinic, or you can talk to us about this, but you can get ones which have clear lenses, which are really designed more so to be used in the daytime, because they don't block as much of the blue light. And it's this blue light that we want to block, remember, because it has such a spike in frequency that that's what's telling our brain that it's morning when actually it's evening. Okay, and the better ones that you can get have an orange tint to them, which takes a little bit of adjustment, but have a really powerful effect. And you'll notice that when you start wearing them, your sleep improves massively. Because when blue light hits the back of the eye, in the eye you cannot make the beginnings of what later becomes melatonin, and melatonin is the sleep hormone. And there's a lot of research linking light exposure or fake light exposure with a lack of melatonin production. So using these blue light blocking glasses can be a really nice way to, oh wow, I've been wearing these for an hour, and you're almost nodding off. So you really do get a quality night's sleep. The other things that you can do on a computer is use a free piece of software called Flux, F.lux, which you can Google. And for those of you working in an office scenario, this is something I would highly recommend you do, because what happens with Flux is it adjusts the light of your laptop or desktop screen based on what the sun is doing. You put in your coordinates and it changes the light on your screen, so it's as natural as can be. So this is a really important thing to do. And then of course the other thing is using red light, of which we have several videos already. You may want to go to the stage 2 section of your patient journey to see these. But red light is essentially the antidote to blue light in terms of frequency. So using red light therapy as a kind of neurological hack can be an important way to mitigate really the damaging effects of the blue light. So we want maximum sunlight exposure in the morning, we want minimum exposure in the evening. We can use Flux, we can use screen protectors now for iPhones and Androids, and you can literally go on Amazon and blue light protectors. It's becoming quite popular now as the effects are becoming more recognised. Okay, many of you will notice that now even on iPhone there's a night shift mode which takes some of the blue light out of it, but frankly it's nowhere near enough. It's like a tiny difference. But what you can do, and hopefully I explain this is okay, is I only know on iPhone, no, I know on both. On iPhone you can go to accessibility and go to colour filters, and you can put on a red tint which takes out a lot of the blue without the need for buying anything. And on Android you can download a piece of software called Twilight, an app called Twilight, which can also make the screen a little bit more red to take the blue out of it. So these are the light-based practical tips that we want you to use.